Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for today's introduction of Packback's new instant feedback feature. And today's webinar is really a feature that's going to be rolling out in the next couple days here on Packback. So this is a early advanced preview for folks who have worked with Packback in the past or have been talking to members of our team recently. So we're very, very excited that you're here. And before we jump into any of the content, I wanted to take a second to just thank everyone for being here with us today. This is a really exciting moment for our team. This feature that we're going to be talking about today is something that's been in planning and in our roadmap for several years. We've been working on developing the infrastructure and building out the system to make this possible. So to have you all here today to hear about this is really exciting for us. Thanks for having this time with us. So as we jump into the content, I want to first introduce myself and my co-presenter. My name is Jessica Tenuta, and I'm Packback's Chief Product Officer. And I'm joined today by Dr. Craig Booth, who's Packback's Chief Technology Officer. Craig, do you want to introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about why you're excited to share this feature?
Oh, absolutely. So hello, everyone. My name is Craig Booth. I'm Packback's CTO. I arrived at Packback in a fairly roundabout kind of way. My background is research. I was most recently a researcher in computational astrophysics at the University of Chicago. And at some point, I realized that what really got me out of bed in the morning was building things that people use. So I made the move to industry to scratch that itch. And this, honestly, is very, very exciting for me. This is the reason that I get out of bed in the morning. We are presenting something now that I very much hope and expect will have a tangible impact on the experience of very many students.
Awesome. So happy to have you here talking with me today. And this has been such a fun feature to build by your side. I also want to mention to everybody who's joining us today that we have two of our team members in the chat, Ariam and Ishani. They're members of our experience management team. They'll be watching the chat, helping to answer your questions there, and also pulling questions that folks ask in the chat out for us to respond to at the end of the webinar. We'll leave several minutes at the end for questions and discussion. So if you have questions that you'd like addressed in the webinar, feel free to drop them in there, and our team members will grab as many of them as they can. So thanks everybody again for joining us today. As we jump into introducing the new feature, I wanted to first share some context of where this feature fits into our overall coaching model on Packback. Some of you may have seen this diagram before, but this really represents the places in which students interact with Packback's AI and vice versa. So when a student first signs on to Packback and they start writing a post, they've always received some very simple feedback while they write, giving them feedback on the length of their post and the structure of their question. But it's always been fairly simple at the writing stage. In the past, before the feature we're talking about today, the real magic happened behind the scenes once they submitted their post. It was checked against our curiosity score algorithms and checked against our moderation algorithms, which looked for all sorts of things like close-endedness in a question, plagiarism, etc. And if a post had any of those issues found, in the past, the post would be moderated, the students would receive feedback by email and could choose to edit and republish their post if they wanted to. So in this new model we're going to be talking about today, we made a huge investment in the right stage of this cycle to help move feedback as far left as possible in the process, give students opportunities to revise while they write, and really put that feedback as close to the experience that students have of interacting with the platform as possible. So this is just for some context, and we can reference back to this at any point in the presentation if y'all would like to see how this new feedback fits into the other kinds of interaction students get from the Packback platform. So as we jump into explaining the design of this feature a little bit, I always think it's very important for us to share our pedagogical basis behind our features. We obviously are a small startup company and one that's growing, thankfully, because of folks like you who have joined us on this webinar, but we are not academic researchers. We are tool builders that are looking to bring the best of academic research to the classroom and make it actionable. So when we think about building out a feature, we look to researchers who have done the work in understanding what makes someone motivated to learn, what keeps someone motivated to learn, what gets someone engaged. So you may have seen this, this diagram before if you've looked through any presentations from Packback before, but I want to bring this back up here to highlight really where this feature is supporting student motivation specifically. While Packback is a discussion platform, our focus is really on building intrinsically motivating and curiosity-inspiring learning environments. So we've always focused heavily on the first two pieces of self-determination theory, which is a positive psychology theory around how to build motivating environments. Relevancy speaks to how connected someone feels to the actions they're taking. How connected is it to their personal life goals and their personal purpose? And autonomy, how much choice do they feel they have over their actions? So obviously, with it being a student-driven inquiry discussion platform, students asking their own questions and choosing what to respond to and what to interact with allows them to connect what they're learning in class to things that they care about as they ask questions. But the area where we're investing in this feature is really the competency or mastery area, which is helping students or really anyone who is experiencing a motivating environment know how they are performing and know how they can get better with tangible feedback. So this relates very closely to mastery learning. And what we've developed in this feature is really designed to support mastery learning. Mastery learning really speaks to, and I'm sure this is no surprise to anybody on this webinar, but really speaks to a term for learning experiences that allows students to receive feedback and adjust their work as needed until they've achieved results that meet standards. So they're able to move through a curriculum at the pace required for them to achieve mastery, as opposed to just on a pace or on a schedule. The goal of this is really to provide a non-punitive feedback loop that encourages growth over feedback solely for assessment purposes. And this connects very closely to the work of Bloom's 2 sigma problem. When he looked at this is Benjamin Bloom, a researcher most well known for Bloom's taxonomy of cognition, but also well known for this problem that he observed when looking at students who received one-on-one tutoring compared to students who received simply conventional classroom methods of instruction. Students who received one-on-one tutoring performed 2 standard deviations better than those in the conventional classroom. And even at the time he was doing this research, Dr. Bloom knew that technology would one day advance to a point that would make one-on-one tutoring possible to support mastery learning at scale in larger classes. This was a challenge at the time when he was looking at this in class sizes of 25 or 30, he knew that one-on-one tutoring wasn't tenable. And now we have class sizes of 500 to 1,000 students, even some larger than that on the Packback platform. So what we're talking about today is how technology, specifically modern technology, can be used to make that kind of one-on-one feedback possible at scale. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to Craig to talk a little bit more about the frameworks that were used to develop the specific writing feedback rules that we provide in the Instant Feedback platform.
Great, thanks, Jess. So there obviously exists a really rich body of research on writing, what good writing is, and how to teach it. So the very worst thing that Packback could try to do is just reinvent the wheel and spin up our own entirely unique, non-grounded in research way of doing things. So we absolutely did not do that. Everything that we're talking about is grounded in something called the 6+1 traits of writing. This is a framework that has been widely used for many decades to coach and teach better writing. And these 6+1 traits are really nothing more than 6+1 words that provide a common language between teachers and students to help guide the instruction and assessment of writing, and to help us organize our thoughts and have a shared and common language. So these 6+1 traits are listed here. They are voice, which is essentially the way that the writer brings the topic to life. Then there are ideas, which are the meaning and development of the author's message. The +1 in the 6+1 traits is presentation. This is not necessarily writing itself, but how you present what you write is a key part of getting a message across. And then the remaining 4 are conventions, which are essentially the mechanical correctness of a piece of writing. There is organization, which represents the internal structure of a piece, and then word choice and sentence fluency around the way words and phrases flow throughout the text. So we took as our basis these 6+1 traits of writing, and since this is quite a number of categories of feedback, we collapsed them into 4 categories of feedback that Packback questions will give feedback on. So we collapsed them into, here we go, I think I can move slides. No, Jess, could you move the slide for me? Oh, there we go, maybe I did it. Okay, so the four categories of Packback's instant feedback are curiosity, which is everything related to the amount of effort and interest that a student is showing, as well as the structure of their question. Credibility, which we've elevated to the top level of feedback that we give because source citations and credibility are an incredibly important part of college level discussion. Then communication, which includes feedback on things like formatting, the use of media, and the structure of posts. And convention, which includes the more mechanical things like grammar, spelling, and fluency. So I think the best way to really understand what instant feedback looks like is with a live demo. So I will just leave you with we give feedback along these four dimensions: curiosity, credibility, communication, and convention. And I will hand back to Jessica, who will take you through what this actually looks like in the platform.
Give me just 1 second. I'm going to share my screen here. I'm also just going to make sure that everyone can see it. So give me just 1 second. So as I mentioned earlier, the way that I accessed this page is through, I clicked the Ask a New Question button from the main feed of my community. I could also access this page and receive this feedback when posting responses on Packback questions or posting counterpoints or supporting points. So this feedback is not limited to just questions. It is tuned and optimized for the different kinds of posts that a student would make on the platform. And just to provide kind of a circle back to the context that I shared earlier, when I was mentioning the simple feedback that we provided previously, I was referring to this as I'm highlighting here. Students would receive small pieces of feedback beneath the text boxes that they interacted with on the structure and length of the content in that text box. But it was not as robustly connected to our curiosity score, and it didn't look at the entirety of the post as a holistic post. It looked at each individual atomic element and gave feedback on that. So what this looks like now, and I'm going to actually paste in some content here because while it's very exciting to experience writing in here, it's not as exciting to watch somebody write multiple paragraphs on the platform. So I'm going to paste in some content that I know has some grammar errors and some potential flags on it. So if you all noticed, the right-hand side updated instantly when I made that content in the text box in the description. And you can see a few things that look very different than what you would typically see on Packback right now live. So I submitted this small piece of content here with some formatting and some bullets. It's just a small description of our instant feedback feature. What I can see in the sidebar here now is a range of my curiosity score. I can see that my post may be flagged. So in the past, if a student ever received feedback on a post being flagged and moderated, that would happen after submission. So if I now submit content into the real-time or instant feedback feature, I'm able to see notifications of reasons why my post might be flagged. In this case, I have two potential flags. This one is looking at some language in this post that might indicate that this is more related to the structure of the class as opposed to the content of the class. So this is looking at most likely recognizing keywords like student feedback or I think what else might have caused that in here? Their question, their homework, their feedback, those words may indicate that the post is more about a student's homework. So if I'm making this post on Packback and I know my post is not about class logistics, it's not about homework, it's about content. Perhaps I'm in a class that's talking about mastery learning or about coursework. So sort of a meta level on education, right? And I make this submission, I can dismiss this and let the platform know that this flag is not relevant to me. That does not mean it won't still be checked by our backend algorithms afterwards and verified by our moderators, but the student does not have to always see that their post might be flagged if they know for sure that this is not going to be a post that's going to be moderated. So they can choose to dismiss that. I also see a flag that right now my post does not have a question title. So I can flesh this out and say, in what ways does Packback's instant feedback support students? Once I add that, I'll dynamically see the flags update now that I've added that. And we do note to students that plagiarism is checked after posting. We do a very robust plagiarism search after a student submits. It's a time-consuming process, and we want to be able to have this feedback deliver content in real time. We also wanted to make sure that we didn't show detailed feedback on what they might be plagiarizing from for students who might be trying to take advantage of that feedback. So we've been very thoughtful in the development of this feature to help avoid cases where students could try to game up their score or use the feedback to have not good intentions in the writing. Not a very common occurrence, but something we wanted to be thoughtful about in the development of the feature. So now that I've cleared out my potential flags, I'm going to come back to all feedback, and I see that I'm now getting feedback on grammatical correctness of my post. So as I jump into this, and before I correct any of these pieces of feedback, a very important element of this new feedback that we're adding is that while many of the other components of our feedback tie to our curiosity score, grammar, spelling, and sentence fluency do not, and that's very intentional. The goal of this is to make sure that students receive grammar feedback and can choose to elevate and tweak their writing and be comfortable writing in academic settings. But we don't want that score to ever penalize or bias against students who are English language learners or are less comfortable writing in English. So it's trying to strike a balance of always providing that feedback, but decoupling feedback from assessment. So on the grammar panel here, I have options to be able to switch to alternatives for this typo on actionable. I can change that and the feedback disappears. If I look here and I see I've repeated a word, I can actually correct that in the text. And again, I will see dynamically updated feedback. So in a few seconds, that'll update and that piece of feedback will disappear. So whether students are writing dynamically in the text box or whether they're accepting from the sidebar, both will work and give real-time and instantaneous updates to the student. So now that I have written out a full and robust post, but I see that I still have not yet fully filled all of the options that I could have to make a so-called perfect post in the Packback platform. The areas where I have opportunities to improve now are under the credibility category and the communication category. So I see one that I'm being told that my post does not have a source. So I might go down to the source field here and write that this was inspired by Bloom's 2 sigma problem. Once I've added that reference, then I'll see my feedback update and I will see that I've cited a source and see the encouragement for that. Under communication, right now I'm getting a piece of feedback saying that I'm using a lot of formatting, and for the length of this post, I'm using a lot of bolding. So I don't have to accept this feedback by any means. I can choose to say, no, this is actually helpful and I want to leave this feedback in place or leave this formatting in place. But I can choose to update this to make sure that I have used an optimal amount of formatting. At some point, formatting can end up being distracting to the legibility of a post. So now that I've changed that and I see I've reduced the amount of formatting in my post, I get a new piece of feedback that was potentially less weighty to the score and to the importance of improving the post. But now that I've corrected the first issue, I see a new piece of feedback encouraging me to take it further. So now it's requesting that I add a piece of media to my post. So I'm going to come into my files. This is also a relatively new feature of being able to directly upload images and GIFs into the platform so students can include an image in their post from their own, I put it right in the middle of a sentence there. I can upload an image, which is something that we used to typically only support embedding of images. So now that I have updated that, I will see the image get embedded and I will see my score and my feedback update again. And this is a picture of our office pepper out in the summer flowers. Can't go many places, but we can still see the flowers. So now I undid, so I'm going to take this formatting off just so you can all see the new feedback and what happens when I achieve the recommendation on amount of feedback used. So now that I've updated that, I'll see my feedback update. I'm going to undid a couple of things. There we go. And I see that I have feedback that's giving me praise around attention to convention, spelling, fluency, and grammar. I see that I have positive feedback around my question title length. So it's legible, short enough to be quick to read, but detailed enough to be meaningful. If I had posted a close-ended question, and perhaps I will do that, what is Packback's instant feedback? If I make this a close-ended question, I'll see my curiosity category update, and I'll see a warning that my post appears to be close-ended. Because this is a close-ended what is question, this could really only be answered with a description as opposed to with a open-ended discussion. So now that I've made that update, even though I had praised previously, if I change my content, I will see a new flag appear if I then have triggered one of the rules on the instant feedback feature on our curiosity score. So If I know for sure that my post is not closed-ended, I could choose to dismiss that, but rather I will update this again, and then we'll submit. We'll update. And now we are in a great shape to submit. While I have us here at the bottom, I also just want to point out a relatively new feature on the platform as well, that drafts autosave. If your students have ever been typing and they lost internet, or they had their computer die and they somehow lost connection to the Packback platform, we now capture their posts as they're typing, so they never lose their homework. So just a quick highlight there to share with everyone who hasn't seen recent updates on the Packback platform. So I'll submit my post, and my post now appears in the platform. So with that, we'll come back to the slide deck. Give me just 1 second to switch back over to our slides. And again, as I mentioned, we have feedback that's given to students on questions, on responses, on counterpoints, and supporting points that's tweaked just slightly for each of those different use cases. The slides will just take a second. So we'll jump back over, and I'm going to hand it over to Craig to talk a little bit in more detail about the specific details of our rule sets and how we currently give feedback and what has changed in our curiosity score to balance out the clarity of our feedback with the instantaneous nature of the feedback.
Excellent. And Jess, just a warning, I still can't control the slide deck, so I'm going to have to rely on you to move slides for me. So the way I like to think about the instant feedback system is essentially, as a student is writing, once every few seconds, we send their post to the AI, and the AI runs it through a big list of rules. And each of those rules will either return some praise, you're doing great, a tip, this is how you could do better, or a flag, this is going to be escalated to a human moderator to check. So the output from all of these rules is then fed into an algorithm that sorts them by how important they are and shows you only the most relevant recommendations. So high level, what you just saw Jess doing, she was writing, her text was being fed through all of these rules, and then an algorithm was showing you the most important tips and pieces of praise. So a obvious question to ask is exactly what rules do you have in the platform? And right now, as of today or tomorrow, or whenever this feature is released, the list of rules that we have are the following. So under the curiosity heading, you saw Jess demonstrate the use of an open-ended question. We want questions that support discussion, not just what time is the test tomorrow. You also saw Jess talk about a class-specific flag. Your question seems to be about class logistics. What time is the test, or something like that. We also give guidance based on the length of the description and the length of the summary. So everything in white on this table was a part of the existing or old curiosity score. The things that are in darker teal are brand new. And the first brand new thing we have is a flag and a discount on your score based on repetitiveness. This is something else that just came out of the research literature. We essentially have an algorithm that will give you credit for each little combination of 3 words only one time. So if somebody attempts to game the system by pasting, say, the same post in there 5 times, they only get credit for 1 copy of that. So we've begun to disincentivize repetitive posting. Under credibility, we check for the inclusion of a source, because citing something is how you make yourself credible. Under communication, we have 1 brand new thing, and then the 2 lower ones are significantly improved things. The first is that there are standard guidelines around the length of paragraphs that typically mean you're making a well-structured argument, mean that your text is easy to read. If you go out of band on these things, we will just give you the guidance that maybe you should think about bringing it back. This, again, is something that doesn't go into the curiosity score. This is just stylistic guidance for the student. And then, as you saw Jess do in her demonstration, we will give you guidance around the use of media and the use of formatting in both directions. Either you should maybe think about using a bit more formatting, or you've gone a bit crazy on the formatting, maybe dial that back a little bit. And then finally, under convention, this is one of the largest new pieces of work that we're rolling out. We do a very thorough check on your spelling, grammar, and fluency. You saw it pick up repeated words and spelling mistakes for Jess. The AI will also pick up a wide array of misused words, grammatical errors, and so on and so on and so on. And then finally, we will detect whether or not the post seems to be in the English language. And again, this does not count for somebody's curiosity score, but if they're writing in a non-English language, we'll give the guidance that typically posts on Packback are expected to be in English. So as of today, this is what version 1.0 of the AI looks like. Thank you, Jess. But we're already planning how to improve this. And already by late summer, we're planning to roll out version 1.1 of the AI, which includes a whole bunch of new and exciting things, including a passive versus active voice classifier. Typically, if people are writing in the passive voice, it means their work is harder to read and more wordy. So if a student is using too much passive voice, we will not use this for the curiosity score again, but guide them back towards using the active voice. We also have, at this point, Packback has a giant data set, approximately 12 million posts asked by students that have all been tagged by a team of human moderators. And this has enabled us to use cutting edge machine learning, deep learning based technologies to actually make a very accurate open ended versus close ended classifier. And then finally, adding in guidance around the ease of reading. Are your sentences flat and short or convoluted and nested? And again, this would just be in the moment feedback where we try to coach students towards better writing. So that's the late summer of 2020 editions. But I think it's also important to note that this is not a one and done project. We are already beginning to think about what things look like in fall and next spring and how we can continue to build on this in an iterative way. So this is where I would just throw this out to the crowd of people who use Packback. Please feel empowered. If there is something that you see the feedback not doing that you wish it was doing, just let somebody at Packback, maybe your experience manager, know, and that feedback will make its way to Jess and myself, and we will take it on board when we are building out the next versions of the AI feedback. And I think with that, I'm going to hand back to Jessica.
Thanks, Craig. And as you were talking, there have been some really cool comments coming up in the chat of ideas and questions about how we can take this further. I just want to highlight a couple of those just so you all know I am reading along as you're sharing these thoughts. Folks have asked about, Heidi specifically asked about credibility and how credibility is a very hot topic these days. Thinking about how we rate the credibility of the source itself, not just of the student sharing a source. So that's a really awesome question and idea that we can consider for future versions of the AI and the feedback that we provide. I saw another piece of feedback related to credibility from Warren. Warren asked, what if a student cites a source that's irrelevant to the post? So looking at relevancy of source to the content itself in the post. It's another great suggestion for making our credibility section even more robust. I noticed a few other interesting questions and ideas as well. I want to pull out a few of those. One thing I wanted to pause on here before we move into just a quick summary, and we'll move into more questions from the audience here. But Carol Higham, who's used Packback for several years. Hey, Carol, it's great to see you. Carol was asking about how our repetitiveness flag works. Craig, would you mind just rephrasing that again, just in a little bit more detail about how we, not that it's 3-word phrases, but really how we think about identifying the uniqueness of words?
Yes, of course. So, the technical words for how it works are, it just gives you credit for unique trigrams. But what does that mean in real life? It essentially gives credit for any unique combinations of words that you use. So if you repeated, I like dogs, I like dogs, I like dogs, I like dogs in a post, it would identify that I like dogs is a repeated phrase and then only give you credit for that one time. So, in looking at real posts in the platform, again, there are approximately 12 million of them. Most posts will get approximately 100% credit. There is very little repetition inside of most English language. This does flag up occasionally the occasional bad actor who tries to game the system by posting the same sentence a few hundred times. So this will make precisely no difference for the majority of cases. But if somebody is trying to game the student, it's just a neat way of us flagging up to human moderators, hey, you might want to take a look at this.
Thanks so much, Craig. Carol, I hope that added a bit more context on there. And I am also happy to make myself available and ask any questions to Craig after the presentation too, if there's any more detailed questions around exactly how certain rules work or any questions or concerns about how those rules are set up. So I just want to put that out there to make that available to everybody. And I noticed a question earlier in the chat that I want to address here as well before I move into the conclusion. I did want to share that once a student makes their submission, it is still checked robustly against all of our backend algorithms. So we are still checking after the student has submitted. If a student's post should be flagged, those algorithms will flag the post. So nothing has changed about the later stages of our coaching model. This is just bringing the feedback that students would receive in a lagging model to make it as real time as possible or as instant as possible for them. So really making that first stage of writing more robust. So I'll move on here, but I do want to just keep this question in everybody's minds. The most exciting thing, more than the feature that we're showing here and more than the rules themselves, is the infrastructure that was set up to now make it much easier for us to iterate on, add additional rules, tune the score, add additional feedback to students as our professors are requesting. So I would love to just keep this question on everybody's mind, thinking about what would you like to see in the feedback that Packback can provide to students. So I'm going to just quickly summarize what we talked about today, some of the key new highlights, giving students a preview of their post-curiosity score. And I wanted to highlight on this feature in particular of instant feedback, we made a very conscious choice to give a range of score back to students. So this just allows students to know if they are in range of some of the common cutoffs in which professors typically set a minimum. So students can focus on writing their post, making sure that they meet their minimum floor and then choosing to go above and beyond that, as opposed to being completely in the dark about whether or not their post will meet standards and having to edit and republish it afterwards. So this gives them a range. We made a conscious choice to not give them the exact detailed number to make sure that they're focused again on the writing and just removing the anxiety of not knowing if their posts meet standards. The next kind of big thing that I wanted to make sure that I leave us with as 3 takeaways from this new feature is alerting students ahead of time if their post might be flagged. So instead of having a 1-day lag from the time a student makes a post to has their post moderated to sees the email and edits and republishes, they can now have that feedback instantly and adjust with a focus on mastery before they ever submit their post. And the final big change in our instant feedback, besides the instantaneous nature of everything coming through to the student, is the entire addition of the convention category of feedback. Instant grammar, spelling, fluency feedback, and identification of the student's written language in the post. So I wanted to end on a couple of key takeaways. Besides everything you can see on the screen here, the reason why I think this feature, it's exciting for us under any circumstances, but it feels particularly important and relevant, and we're excited to share it at this moment when many of our students and professors are separate from one another. Our Packback team members are all separate from each other right now, as well as we're all quarantining and sheltering in place at home. Thinking about how we can still create the feeling of togetherness and the feeling of instant feedback and support to students, even when we cannot physically be together in the classroom. So the notion of using technology to help keep students engaged and to receive that feedback, even when they are remote from one another and from their instructor, is something that's really exciting for us at this moment, and a small way that we hope we can help with everything that's going on in our broader educational market right now. And finally, the third bullet point I wanted to pull out here is the use of technology to help enable human interaction. We don't talk about this externally a lot, but something that we talk about internally a lot within our team is the importance of ethical applications of AI. How do we use AI and technology to make sure that we are making people's lives better, instructors' lives better, students' lives better, rather than automating things? So this feedback cannot stand on its own. This feedback is valuable writing feedback and helps to improve students' discussion posts, but it is the baseline of feedback, as opposed to having the instructors who are using Packback or any discussion platform have to check every single post for things like grammar and fluency and those basic writing criteria, which can be automated or can be supported through automation. Using technology to free instructors up for those meaningful human-to-human interactions that no technology could ever replicate. So I kind of want to leave us on a question here of how can knowing that students will receive a baseline of feedback in their discussion free you and free your colleagues up to engage with students in new ways? What wasn't possible before that may be possible with feedback being provided through discussion? So with that, I'm going to move over to our last slide here. I want to call out that if you are new to Packback and you're just discovering Packback through this webinar, first of all, welcome. We're really happy to have you here. If you have not yet seen a demo of the whole Packback platform, a member of our sales or experience management team would be very happy to show that to you. You can request that at the URL on the screen here, or you can just email us at curious@packback.co. If you don't want a full demo, we're also happy to just answer your questions and share resources with you. So I'll leave this up on the screen in case anyone wants to reference. And we'll use our remaining 20 minutes for group questions that came in through the chat. So I'm going to pop over to our internal chat. Ariam and Ishani have been sharing questions with us that they've pulled out for us to focus on. So let me scroll back up to the first question here. So one of the questions that came up was related to the plagiarism feedback we give to students. So I'm not sure who asked, this is from Cassandra. Thank you so much, Cassandra, for asking this question. This question is, so the plagiarism checker, or plagiarism that we are looking for is looking for actual word quotes, not paraphrases. And she asked, will students notice that something is close to a citation in the citation area, but then include no in-text citations? Can we prompt the students to remember to include in-text citations? Wonderful question. I think I'll break that into two pieces. One, how does our plagiarism checker work? What actually happens behind the scenes? How are we giving students feedback on plagiarism? And then the second question of how are we encouraging students to include in-text citations? So Craig, would you mind answering the first? And I'll give you a second. I think we just lost your video feed. Cool, there you're back. Would you mind sharing feedback with Cassandra and with the group on how our plagiarism algorithms work?
Of course. Let me see. I will. I have to be honest with you. I've been having a few internet issues during this, so you broke up a little bit, and I can't read the chat. So I am very, very much reluctant to these questions. But is this the question about the AI detecting the URL of photographs and making sure students cite it properly?
This first one that I shared was actually a question from Cassandra.
Sorry.
This first question.
Okay. Unfortunately, I cannot read the question.
Okay. I will answer this one, and we can get any follow-up questions as well. Now I have Casey, one of our co-founders, making fun of us in the chat for having our internet break up. But so we have two kinds of plagiarism checking that we do on the Packback platform. The first is looking at external plagiarism. So looking to see if a student may have directly quoted or taken content from an external web source and modified it to try to fool a plagiarism checker. Our plagiarism checker was updated in the last year to now look at not just direct quotations, but also paraphrases, changing the content, removing words, changing tense. We're able to detect across those changes. So Cassandra, I think that was the meat of your first question in there of just, are we looking for direct word-to-word quotes, or are we looking for paraphrases? It's the latter, and it's also looking for similar lifted quotes that have been changed in their tense, reordered, sentences moved from the beginning to end. Yeah, we've been really excited to see how that's been working. It's allowed us to catch much more sophisticated cases of students trying to, not necessarily trying to plagiarize, but certainly trying to share content that they've reworded, maybe not enough to make it an original thought. We also added this year the ability to check for internal plagiarism, which is our kind of like internal term for students plagiarizing from each other, or interestingly enough, from themselves. So if a student gives a similar response to two students, but they don't add a new and original thought, that will also be caught through our plagiarism checker as well, using the same rule set that we use for external plagiarism checking. It's been a significant step forward in plagiarism analysis on Packback. When students do have their posts flagged for that reason, our moderators review, and the rules that they look for are has this student properly cited the text that they've referenced in the citation box? And have they included any quotations or references in quotes, so in text feedback, in text citations, and have they given a citation in the text to explain where that content came from? So we never rely exclusively on algorithms for anything that affects a student's grade. We couple algorithmic feedback to cast a net and find potential cases of concern, and then couple that with our internal moderation team who are trained on how to assess and analyze those posts. So again, I noticed a question in the chat that may have been referencing like who are our moderators and how are they trained? Our moderators are trained specifically on how to assess the things that our community guidelines check for and how to make sure that a flag on Packback is valid. So you'll never have a post on Packback moderated by a moderator on our team for not being accurate or not being a topic that you'd be interested in. Our focus is entirely on making sure that the structure of the discussion, the conventions of the discussion, and the communication of the discussion stays effective and breeds a healthy and open-ended discussion for students. So Cassandra, I'm going to jump back over to the attendee chat. Did that answer your question? And do you have any follow-ups on that before I move on to any others? Great. Awesome. Awesome. Yep. Happy that that helps. I'm going to jump on to the next question here. So the next one is, I see that if something is moderated or flagged by the AI, a student must edit by the deadline in order to receive credit. However, I'm asking about effort because a student could put in little effort addressing flags and then still have the post pulled. I'm just reading the full question here. Have we tested this with students? So I'll address the first question. We focus, it's sort of a trade-off of autonomy, flexibility, choice, and feedback versus mandating a certain submission time. So the way that our platform works is if a student makes a post that does not meet standards, if it's flagged and moderated and removed from the platform prior to the deadline date for that week, the student has all those days from when they receive the feedback from the platform to when their deadline is to edit, revise, and republish. If they republish and their post does not meet standards the second time, it will also be checked again and unpublished again through moderation. So there's no way for them to edit the post and get it back on the platform and not have it meet standards. This is where the platform relates to mastery learning in that they have multiple opportunities to edit and revise so long as they get it in by the structure of the deadline. So that's been very successful. We've seen about 40% of students, when they do have a post moderated, they edit it and republish it by the deadline. So that's exciting to see. It means that not every student is choosing to take advantage of that opportunity, but many of them are. And we watch that metric closely to make sure that we're continuously making changes to the platform that increase that number of students that edit and republish. Now, with the introduction of instant feedback, we hope to see the number of students who have their posts flagged and moderated reduce over time. So can we actually measurably see a change in the number of students who have their posts removed from the platform versus make changes before they submit? The next question that is in the presenter chat that was shared with us is, have we tested this with students? Yes, so we've done, with all of our new features that we release that have a student-facing interface, we set up user interviews with students to test the prototype of the feature. We watch them interact with it live, we get their qualitative feedback, and we observe what they would choose to change with something like this, what they would choose to change in their post based on the feedback that they received. And the most exciting thing that I saw when testing this feature with students, we tested with a couple rounds of student feedback. So we made small changes, went back and tested with them again. The most exciting thing I heard was, now I see why this is different than Blackboard and Canvas. Our instructors have seen that for a long time because they see what's happening behind the scenes. But now to see the AI live and interacting with them, it allows them to much more clearly see what is happening that's differentiated from other discussion platforms, not just in the outcomes that happen on the platform, but also in the interaction that they have with the platform. So yes, we had good feedback from students on this. One thing I did not demo, but I want to share here as well, is a small feature that we added is the ability to allow students to tuck the feedback out of the way while they're writing. I know I would personally want that. I don't want to feel like I'm seeing feedback updating while I'm still thinking. So I didn't show it, but we can tuck it out of the way so that while students are writing, they just see a small summary of any new alerts that come up so that they can open that up if they do see any alerts pop up. But tucking it away allows them to write freely not have to be thinking about what feedback they're going to receive, and then open it up when they want to receive the feedback. So kind of supporting different methods of student interaction with feedback. And then there's another question in the chat here as well. Why isn't the AI customizable? Great question. I saw actually a few different versions of that question come in through the chat, and it's a really exciting one. And as I mentioned on the last 2 slides ago, arguably the most exciting thing about the work that we're showing here is not the feature itself, but the re-architecture of the infrastructure of how our AI works, such that things like asking how we could make the AI customizable for an instructor or a class is now infinitely more possible than it would have been in the past. So I guess the short answer is there would always be some things we would want to make sure are present in the Packback platform, like open-ended feedback on questions, right? That's something that we know with certainty across our platform leads to better and more in-depth responses. But I noticed a piece of feedback around, if I don't want my students to use media in the class, could I turn off that piece of feedback? Currently, that's not possible, but the infrastructure we've built here makes the notion of customizing feedback much more possible than it would have been in the past. So I would love to keep hearing those pieces of feedback. The more that we hear those requests, the faster we're able to prioritize things as well. I'm going to jump back into the attendee chat very quickly just to make sure that I am addressing everything that folks are asking. And then I see one additional chat question that was pulled over for me to take a look at or for us to respond to. Is it possible for instructors, to get a report of what the students are modifying, the metrics, et cetera? This is an awesome question, and it's so cool that you're asking this. This has been on our product team's mind lately as well. We have data on when posts are moderated. We have data on the date that occurred, why the post was moderated. We have the state of the post at any given time. But the notion of tracking metrics on change over time is something that we've been thinking about a lot. I think it's something I can see why it would be relevant for instructors. It's also something that we want for our product team to ask each time that we tweak, especially now that we're going to be doing it more frequently, making small changes to our feedback to really look at optimizing towards best outcomes in posts. The ability to track what students are changing over time and how they're interacting with that feedback is going to be essential. So it's not possible for us to generate a report right now of the pre and post state of a post. Lots of posts in that sentence, but not possible for us to generate that report for instructors right now. But I can only assure you that this is something that's been very much on our mind too, and that we want for our own ability to be able to think about how we make new feedback rules. So awesome question, awesome suggestion. That's definitely top of mind for us. And as soon as we have that capability, I will be happy to share that with our professor and instructor users. I'm not sure who asked that question, but I'd love to just thank you for putting that one in. Cool. So those are the questions that were pulled over by Ariam and Ishani from our team. But we've got a few minutes left here. I'm just back over into the attendee chat, taking a look at what y'all are posting. Are there any other questions that folks would like me to address or respond to, or generally any feedback or thoughts that you'd like to share with the group while we are all here together? Great. I'll wait a few moments here. Ariam also just dropped another question in for me to respond to. And Heidi, I see that you have something you want to share. So I will make sure that we address that before we end the session today. So let me address this next one. If students violate internal plagiarism when responding to another question, will they get automatic points assigned for that response? Great question. So when a student is writing a post, as I mentioned in the demo, plagiarism is checked after posting, so they wouldn't be notified while they're writing. If their post might be flagged for plagiarism, they would be notified right after. So initially, when a student makes a submission, right after they submit, within a few seconds, even the plagiarism checker returns results in a few seconds. They will see if their post is flagged for any reason. During the time when a post is flagged but not yet moderated, temporarily they will have points assigned for that post. But once this post is moderated, the post is unpublished and the points are removed. So once we have a post in that state, the student receives the email of why their post was moderated with feedback on how to improve it. They can edit and republish, and they're able to re-earn their points. So during that period of time, they have points assigned to their post, but the moderation occurs quickly. Once that moderation occurs, then their post does not earn any points until they edit and republish. Or who asked that one, but I hope that addressed the question, and I'm happy to add more detail if it did not. Awesome. And I see your question in here, Heidi, that you just shared. Like to figure out how to keep students' questions on topic. Heck, so would we. This is a really exciting next area for our AI to evolve into. Looking at this is another case where we have tried to avoid getting into the content of the post related to the topics of the post themselves, because our moderators are not experts on your class. They're experts on our community guidelines and on our standards for minimum quality on discussion posts. So we're looking at ways to find a balance between how can we help to provide feedback and guidance to students around what instructors want them to write about, without attempting to be experts on an individual instructor's course curriculum, because I could see a lot of ways where we could get that wrong. So I would love to, this is a question that like just out to the group, I would love to share with everyone and get everybody just thinking about, we're definitely thinking about this internally as well, but it's something I would love to set up times to talk to folks about the specific ways in which you'd like to see students corrected or given feedback on the topic of their post. So it's a complicated one, and I would love to talk to our instructors about that, because it's one I don't think that we can solve on our own. It really relies on a partnership with our individual instructors and how they're constructing their course curriculum. I know that's kind of a vague question, Heidi, and I apologize. It's just a complicated problem, and it's one that I'd love to hear more feedback from our instructors on before we try to solve it. I'm jumping down to the bottom here. Yep, awesome. And multiple sources question from Diana. Let me just see that whole question. Will students get more points from multiple sources? Great question, Diana. This is actually something that, unrelated to instant feedback, I've seen students, I've seen instructors looking for the ability to have students have multiple separate lines for sources. Currently, right now, they get a piece of feedback for including a source. If they include multiple sources, it's the same amount of curiosity points. It's the same amount of praise in the instant feedback. So we don't have separate rewards for multiple sources, but that's a great suggestion for the notion of the next iteration of real-time feedback. So that's one I will note down as well. And before we leave this chat personally, we're going to go through all of the comments in the chat, because there were a ton of awesome ideas and questions about how we can make the instant feedback better. And thank you, Diana. I'm glad that was helpful. I've noticed that coming up through a couple of different sources, both MBAs and instructors who want to encourage students to use both their textbook and external resources. So that's a great question. And one question from Donna here: will we be offering instructor trainings on best practices? That is an awesome question, Donna, excuse me. We have another webinar at the end of the month about instructing and engaging large courses. And we're happy to also set up individual one-on-one consultations around best practices for online discussion and using online tools to keep students engaged in remote, or I know this is like not a positive buzzword lately, but the hybrid flexible courses, or high flex, trying to prepare for the unpreparable scenario of the fall semester, not knowing what we are going to be facing. Any way that we can be supportive in that, we are happy to set up one-on-one consultations to see how our tool can be used to support that, but also generally how to use online discussion and other community practices to keep students engaged. And I think that's a good place for us to pause. If there are any last thoughts or questions, I would be happy to answer them. Ishani and Aryam, thank you so much. This was an awesome chat and a lot of things to go through. Thank you both so much for doing a great job in the chat. And just a final point here, if you'd like to see Packback and see the rest of it, I only showed a small piece of it. If you'd like to see Packback, we'd be happy to share a demo or answer your questions. Feel free to send any questions or requests for a demo to curious@packback.co. And my email personally is jessica@packback.co. So if you have any product-related questions, feedback on how we can make the platform work better for you and your class, I am always all ears. It's the meat of my job, and it's the reason that I get up in the morning, to Craig's point. So very, very happy to have y'all here. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you again so much for being with us today. This is a very exciting moment in our company history, and I'm so happy to have y'all here.